The Panther King and the Foxes. Lesson. Chapter 1. The Weight of the Crown. The throne room breathed with history. Centuries of beeswax had been worked into the flagstones until they gleamed like dark honey, and the air held the ghost of wine spilled in celebrations and catastrophes alike. Firelight moved across the walls in restless patterns, catching first the gilt edges of forgotten treaties, then the blade of a ceremonial sword, then, always, the crown. It sat on the Panther King's head like a question that had been answered with violence. No priest had blessed it onto his brow. No ancient bloodline had carried it down through generations on a velvet cushion. He had taken it in a winter so brutal that even the memory of it made old soldiers touch their scars. And having taken it, he had done something more difficult. He had kept it. Through 14 winters, when lesser rulers would have splintered like ice beneath a hammer. Through droughts and plagues, and the quiet, patient treacheries that grow in the dark corners of every court. Now he gently lounged, and it was a deceptive lounging, the kind a panther practices in tall grass, with a goblet balanced in one dark paw. The wine within it was older than most of his courtiers, dark as arterial blood, worth more than a farmer's yearly wage. He swirled it absently, watching the evening's petitioners with eyes the color of ember held up to candlelight, translucent, ancient, seeing through rather than at. The court had learned, some quickly and some with permanent scars, never to mistake his leisure for inattention. A panther at rest is still a panther. The claws are merely waiting. Chapter 2. The Court of the Soul, the architecture of trust. The Fox clans served him with a precision that bordered on artistry. They always had, even before the crown, even when he was just another warlord with ambitions and a talent for not dying. They were the architects of his prosperity, builders of invisible structures more enduring than any castle, trade routes that webbed across 3 kingdoms, contracts written in language so precise they could weather any storm of interpretation, ledgers that transformed chaos into columns of ink. The Foxes could see 3 moves ahead, while others were still puzzling over the first. They were practical in the way that water is practical, finding the path of least resistance while somehow always flowing toward advantage. They kept the kingdom's gold moving like water through mountain stone, constant, purposeful, life-giving. The Panther King did not trust easily. Trust was a currency he spent with the caution of a merchant who had been swindled in his youth and never forgotten the lesson. But he trusted the Foxes. They had earned it, coin by coin, promise by promise. They had earned it in ledgers that balanced when balancing them meant working through the night. They had earned it in caravans that arrived on time, even when arrival meant bleeding from bandit arrows. They had earned it in promises kept, even when keeping them cost dearly, sometimes in gold, sometimes in blood, sometimes in the smaller deaths of reputation and pride. In return, he gave them something more valuable than gold, more enduring than titles. He gave them certainty. Under his rule, the bargain was simple. Competence was rewarded with opportunity. Honest mistakes were expected, even tolerated, even understood as the price of attempting difficult things. Growth was encouraged because stagnation was a slower death than any sword. But deception, that was different. That was a blade turned inward, a poison in the well that everyone drank from. Deception was the one unforgivable thing. Chapter 3. The Unraveling Thread. Ravel had quick paws and a quicker mind, and in the counting chambers of the Panther King's administration, both were treasured. He could track 3 conversations simultaneously, parsing them for intent and opportunity, while his paws flew across an abacus. He calculated compound interest the way other creatures breathed, automatically, without conscious thought. He could charm the granite-faced merchants from the northern territories, could make them smile despite themselves, despite their cultural prohibition against showing teeth to outsiders. The other foxes admired him, some envied him, all respected him. The Panther King had noticed him, which made the mistake so much worse, which made what came after feel like falling down a well in the dark, knowing with each moment of descent that the bottom would hurt more than he could imagine. It started small, doesn't it always? A caravan returned from the eastern provinces light, 15 gold pieces short of what the manifest promised. Not a fortune, not even a significant percentage of the shipment's value, but wrong. The number was wrong, and in the precise world of the counting chambers, wrong might as well have been written in fire. Ravel had counted it himself, had run his paws through the coin, had signed the register with his personal mark, the flourish on the R that he'd practiced until it looked both casual and elegant. The error was his, though he couldn't say where it had gone wrong. A bribe he'd forgotten to record, a toll paid twice in the confusion of an order crossing, a simple miscount in firelight, fatigue making him see 3 coins where there were 2. It didn't matter. The number was wrong, and the number was his responsibility. He could have reported it, should have, by every law written and unwritten in the kingdom. The Panther King's justice was strict, but it was just. An honest mistake, reported honestly, would cost him a reprimand, perhaps a temporary demotion, while he retraced his steps and found the error. Certainly some embarrassment, some dent in his carefully cultivated reputation as the fox who never failed. But as Ravel sat at his desk that night, the ledger opened before him like an accusation. He imagined the disappointment in the king's amber eyes. He imagined the whispers from other foxes who would suddenly, conveniently, remember their own perfection. He imagined his star rising so steadily, so promisingly, suddenly arrested in its ascent. So he made a choice. He adjusted the ledger. It was just a small notation, really. Nothing dramatic. He moved the discrepancy to a different column, attributed it to a different month's accounting, nested it in a place where it would look like an expected variance rather than an error. He'd find the missing gold, eventually, he told himself. This was merely administrative, temporary, a small edit to buy time for a solution. He told himself this with enough conviction that he almost believed it. The Panther King found it in 11 days. Chapter 4. The Audit. The audit came without warning, as they always did. That was part of their design. You couldn't prepare for them, couldn't polish the numbers into something presentable. They caught you as you were, caught the work as it actually existed rather than as you wished it to be. The Panther King descended from his throne and walked through the counting chambers himself, his footfalls silent on marble despite his size. He was a creature of winter nights and deep forests, and he moved like both, inevitable and soundless. The foxes in the counting chambers felt their fur rise as he passed. an instinct older than civilization, older than what the creatures called mathematics. He stopped at Ravel's desk, simply stopped, as if he'd always intended to stop exactly there, as if the universe had arranged itself around this specific moment. He extended one claw toward the open ledger. The claw was clean, well kept, sharp enough to split a hair. Or a throat. "This figure," he said, his voice pitched low enough that only Ravel could hear, gentle as silk, drawn across skin. "Walk me through it." Ravel did. His explanation was smooth, practiced. He'd rehearsed it in his mind 100 times, refining it until it gleamed. It was technically accurate if you didn't look too closely at the previous month's records, if you didn't ask follow-up questions, if you didn't pull the thread that would unravel everything. The Panther King listened without interruption. His tail moved in a slow rhythm that Ravel couldn't read. Not anger, not quite. Something more complex. Something that felt like watching a storm gather on a distant horizon, knowing it would eventually arrive, knowing there was nowhere to run. When the fox finished, the king closed the ledger with a soft thump. The sound felt final, like a door closing, like a judgment rendered. "Bring both books to the throne room," he said. Each word was perfectly weighted, perfectly controlled. Tonight, Chapter 5, The Accounting of Souls. The court assembled in that particular way that courts do when they smell blood in the water. Eager but cautious, hungry for drama but wary of becoming part of it. Not the full gathering. The Panther King didn't believe in public humiliation for its own sake, didn't believe in breaking someone just to watch them break, but enough. The Fox clans sent their elders, the ones who had served long enough to remember what lessons looked like when they cost everything. The king's inner circle attended, silent as stones. Ravel stood in the center of the floor with 2 ledgers at his feet, the official record and the altered one. Truth and lie made manifest in ink and paper. His tail was tucked tight against his body, every line of him drawn small, trying to take up less space in the world. The Panther King didn't rage. Rage would have been easier, cleaner. Rage could be weathered and forgotten. Instead, he simply displayed the discrepancy, line by line, number by number. He showed how the 15 gold had been moved, hidden, obscured. He showed the mechanism of deception laid bare, made it simple enough that even the youngest apprentice in the room could follow the thread of dishonesty from beginning to end. His voice remained level throughout, almost gentle, almost kind. That somehow made it worse, made it feel like a surgeon explaining exactly which organs he would need to remove. "You have served well," the king said, when the evidence lay bare. Undeniable, damning in its simplicity. Your error was understandable. Your concealment was not. Ravel's ears flattened against his skull. "Your Majesty, I intended to. I know what you intended." The king's eyes caught the firelight, and for a moment they seemed to burn from within. You intended to protect your reputation. You chose your pride over my trust. That is the transaction we are examining here. Not 15 gold pieces. Those are nothing, dust, meaningless. We are examining what you were willing to trade away to avoid a moment of discomfort. The room held its breath. Even the fire seemed quiet, waiting. "You will go to the borderlands," the king continued. to the western routes where the mountain passes freeze 4 months of the year, and the bandits test every caravan like wolves testing a fence. You will manage the trade roads there for 1 full year. No assistants, no clerks, no one to blame when things go wrong. Every coin that moves through those territories will pass through your paws. Every contract will bear your mark. Every loss will be yours to explain, yours to carry, yours to make right. It was, everyone understood, both exile and education. The borderlands work was brutal, thankless, and absolutely critical to the kingdom's survival. The roots there were the kingdom's lifelines, but they bled their administrators dry. Foxes who served there either learned the true rate of accountability, what it meant when every decision was yours and yours alone, or they broke under it. Some came back tempered like steel. Some didn't come back at all. Ravel bowed low, his voice barely audible, scraped raw. Yes, my king. One more thing. The Panther King descended from his throne, crossing the floor until he stood before the fox. The size difference between them was absurd, almost comical. The panther could have ended Ravel with a single casual blow. Instead, he lowered his great head until they were eye to eye, until Ravel could see his own reflection in those amber depths. I am not angry with you, Ravel. I am disappointed. Do you understand the difference? Yes, Your Majesty. I don't think you do. Not yet. Anger would be simpler for both of us. Anger burns hot and fast, and then it's gone. Disappointment is colder. Disappointment is what you feel when someone you believed in proves that belief was misplaced. Disappointment is the weight of potential unrealized, of trust extended and then carelessly discarded. The king straightened, and somehow the distance between them felt greater than before. But understand this as well. I am sending you away because I believe you can learn what you need to learn. If I thought you're beyond teaching, beyond redemption, we would be having a very different conversation. This conversation would end with you leaving the kingdom entirely, not just leaving the capital. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Warning, warning. Please go to the School of Magic. Majesty is the sword. Good. Then go. The western routes are waiting, and they are not patient with fools. The fox left that night, before the moon rose, carrying clothes, some food, his ledgers, and his shame. Chapter 6. The Crucible of the Borderlands. The western routes changed everyone who worked them. The mountains there were older than kingdoms, older than the idea of kingdoms, and they cared nothing for the ambitions of creatures who lived such brief, bright lives. The passes froze solid from late autumn until early spring, and during those months, every mistake in planning became a potential death sentence. The bandits who haunted those routes were organized, intelligent, ruthless. They had to be to survive in such unforgiving territory. Ravel arrived in the dead of winter, which meant he arrived to immediate crisis. 3 caravans were stranded in the mountains, caught by an early storm. The local merchants were on the verge of revolt over a tax assessment they claimed was calculated wrong. The outpost's grain stores were running low because someone, his predecessor, who had fled south rather than face another season, had failed to properly plan for an extended winter. There was no one to help him, No one to delegate to, no one to blame. Just Ravel, the numbers, and the consequences of every choice rippling out into the lives of people who depended on him to be right. He worked 18-hour days and dreamed in columns of figures. His paws developed calluses from rope work, hauling supplies, securing loads, doing the physical labor that his position in the capital would have exempted him from. His coat lost its sleek sheen, became practical and dull. He learned to fight, not well, but well enough to survive 2 bandit ambushes. He learned to negotiate with people who had no reason to trust a representative of the distant crown, learned to earn respect through competence rather than title. He learned what it meant when people's lives depended on him being honest, being right, being there. The first time he lost a caravan to bandits, he wept, not from fear or frustration, but from the weight of it. 6 people dead because he had misjudged the risk, had sent them through a pass he'd assessed as safe when it wasn't, would never be again. He wrote to their families himself. He calculated restitution from his own salary. He marked the failure in his ledger with hands that shook, because this time there was no hiding it, no moving it to a different column. This time, the cost of being wrong was written in blood. But he learned. He learned to assess risk with a conservatism born of consequence. He learned to trust his instincts while verifying them with data. He learned that the purpose of the numbers wasn't to make himself look good. It was to map reality accurately enough that people could make decisions that kept them alive. He learned what accountability actually meant. Chapter 7. The Return. 14 months later, not 12, because a late winter had closed the passes and extended his service, because the mountains didn't care about administrative calendars, Ravel walked back into the throne room. He looked different. The other foxes in the counting chambers barely recognized him. He was thinner, the comfortable softness of court life burned away by physical labor and chronic stress. The sleek shine of his coat had dulled to something more practical, less decorative. His paws bore scars from rope work and cold stone and the general violence of life at the kingdom's edge. There was a new scar across his muzzle that he never explained. But his eyes were steady. They looked at the world differently now, with the gaze of someone who had seen what things actually cost, who had paid those costs personally. And the ledgers he carried were pristine. The Panther King received him without ceremony, without audience. This was private, a conversation between a king and a subject who had been sent away in disappointment and returned something else. The king reviewed the books in silence, while Ravel stood at attention. Each page received careful consideration. The king's claw traced columns of figures, paused at notations, verified calculations with the mental quickness that had helped him win a crown. Every number aligned, every discrepancy, and there were discrepancies, because the borderlands were chaos, barely contained, because the borderlands were chaos, barely contained by mathematics. Was noted, explained, accounted for, with painful honesty. The king observed, "It wasn't a question." "Yes, Your Majesty. Both times I failed to adequately assess the risk. I prioritized speed over security in the first case, and in the second, I relied on outdated intelligence about bandit movements. The losses were mine to bear. I've included my calculations for restitution to the families, which I've been paying from my salary. It will take another 7 months to complete. You negotiated 17 new contracts. 18, Your Majesty. Ravel's voice was quiet but firm. One isn't in the ledger yet. The merchant needed time to consult with his partners, and I didn't want to record it before the signatures were final and the agreement was certain. I learned not to count things before they're real. The Panther King closed the book slowly. A smile played at the corner of his muzzle, something that might have been approval, or might have been satisfaction, or might have been the simple pleasure of seeing potential realized. With him, it was hard to tell the difference, and perhaps there was no difference to tell. You'll be training the new apprentices, he said. The ones who think they're cleverer than they are, who think intelligence is a substitute for wisdom. You'll teach them mathematics and route management and contract law. You'll also teach them what mistakes cost, not in the abstract, not as a cautionary tale, but as lived truth. Ravel's ears rose slowly, cautiously. It wasn't his old position. That was gone, and both of them knew it. This was something different, something harder, something that mattered more, in a way that transcended personal advancement. The king lifted his goblet in a small salute, the wine within it catching the firelight like captured flame. Welcome home. The fox bowed, and this time when he straightened, there were tears on his whiskers, but he was smiling. Chapter 8. The Architecture of Truth. Years later, when young foxes entered the counting chambers for the first time, nervous, ambitious, certain of their own brilliance, they heard the story. Not as a warning exactly, though it served that function. Not as a threat, though the threat was certainly present in its details. More as a map of the terrain they were entering, with its pitfalls marked and its safe paths indicated and its true nature revealed. The story of Ravel, who was brilliant and made a mistake and chose pride over truth, and what that choice cost him. The story of how he was sent away and came back transformed. The story of how mercy and justice could be the same thing if you were willing to believe in redemption. The story, ultimately, of what it meant to serve in the court of the Panther King. The kingdom continued its work, the ledgers balanced. The caravans arrived and departed on their eternal routes. The gold flowed like water through mountain stone, constant, purposeful, life-giving. And the foxes who managed it all learned, one way or another, the fundamental truth of the kingdom. The Panther King ruled from his throne of gold and firelight, and the fox clans served him with numbers and contracts and the careful, constant management of trust. Mistakes were expected because perfection was impossible and growth required risk. Learning was encouraged because stagnation was death. But deception, that was a line drawn in stone, carved so deep that nothing could erase it, because loyalty, true loyalty, couldn't be demanded through fear. Fear was cheap, easy, temporary. Fear evaporated the moment a stronger predator arrived. True loyalty had to be built through something much more difficult, much more costly. The absolute knowledge that honesty, even when it hurt, even when it cost you everything you thought you wanted, was always worth more than its price. The young foxes would learn this. They learned it from Ravel's careful teaching. They learned it from their own mistakes and the consequences that followed. They learned it from the architecture of the kingdom itself, which rewarded truth and punished deception with a consistency that became its own kind of safety. And high above them, from a throne that had been taken and kept through will and winter and the careful cultivation of trust, the Panther King watched with amber eyes, a goblet balanced in one dark paw, the absolute certainty that he would notice when they needed noticing. He always noticed. That was the promise, unspoken but absolute. He would notice when you succeeded and when you failed, when you told the truth and when you lied, when you grew and when you stagnated, and whether that noticing brought reward or ruin depended entirely on the choices you made when no one was watching. Except he was always watching. That was the weight of the crown and the gift of it. The kingdom endured.